Welcome to the show, everybody. Terrific episode today. Who knew insects could be so fascinating? Other than myself, because I've had past insect researchers on the show before, including this guest today. If you go back in time, if you got podcast app before we had video, before this new YouTube channel is nothing but audio, but you can go back and listen to Barrett Klein's 2 episodes in a row last year. You can hear me eating insects and talking about insect sleep and their impact on our culture. So if you dig today's episode, check that out on your favorite podcast app. Otherwise, throw some comments on about this episode, other future inquiries that you might have, other topics that you want to hear about. Anything like that you want to know more about, I'll reach out to the scientists that can give us answers. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Here we are.
All right, facial hair. I've never done this before. I've never had all of this thing on my face. And
You're officially hirsute.
What's that?
Hirsute. Harry. Hirsute.
Hirsute?
Yes, you are hirsute.
What is...
And I'm becoming hirsute.
I don't...
Hirsuter.
I don't know what that word means.
Yeah, it just means hairy. So if you're becoming a werewolf or you're turning into a wolf, you're hirsute.
Oh, wow.
That'll come in handy. You'll find out within the week it'll come in quite handy.
Okay. Yeah, the confirmation bias of then seeing the word everywhere.
Right. That's right.
What the? Why is everyone saying hirsute all of a sudden? That always happens.
And you'll see palindromes everywhere.
That, and now Facebook is going to be targeting all of my ads toward hirsute-based
definitely.
marketing.
Definitely.
And I had one of my most delightful female friends the other night. We were playing a virtual board game, and she said that I look like the morph between Elf and the dad on Elf.
Oh my!
Which I thought was a pretty solid burn. It definitely hasn't helped my self-esteem since I heard that. But
would you prefer to be one or the other, or is it better to be right in between?
I think it's better to be the mix. All right, let's get into it, because I think we already have. I think we're using all this beard stuff, all this fantastic. People want to see behind the scenes that we're good friends, that just have conversations with one another.
About our
it's
facial
not
hair.
all about our facial hair.
About werewolves.
It's not all business all the time. But let's get down to business. My guest today is fantastic. He's one of the most enthusiastic human beings I've ever met. And super talented, an illustrator, an entomologist, a biologist, all of the things. As far as I can tell, all the things. In the past, we've talked about, I ate some insects. I've had him on twice, and he's been on Stand Up Science once. University of Wisconsin, Crosse, my home area. We ate insects together.
Can I interject?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Do you feel stronger with that additional nutrition?
Yeah, I still feel it.
You do. Yeah,
it was about a year ago, and I'm gonna need a re-up soon. We talked about insect sleep. We talked about how insects impact culture. I forced you into talking about insect mating behavior, because for people that haven't heard about it before, boy,
fascinating
topic. We talked about how bees communicate with one another. I might have done
practicing
a
waggle dance. Practicing your waggle dance. Good.
Yeah, I gotta stand up to do it well, and
I've been having my students practice their waggle dances at home remotely.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Are you allowed to grade people on their waggle dance, or is that like a iffy?
That was an optional component for the exercise.
Okay,
they did have to decode honeybee waggle dances. Performing it, that was a plus, a bonus.
So they performed, and then people had to guess what they were signaling with their waggle?
That's right. So what I had them do was hide a treat somewhere off in the distance, maybe 50 or 100 meters outside. And then they trained their partner in this era of social distancing to decode a waggle dance, distance and direction in this waggling dance. Then they performed the waggle dance and sent their partner off to see if they could find the treat.
So you're just crushing virtual teaching right now. No.
Oh, it's not my favorite.
I thought you were taking a sabbatical. Are you not?
Yeah, it starts now.
Yeah.
My research sabbatical starts now and lasts for a year. And I've just started a few different projects I'm really excited about.
So tell people what your official fancy title and everything is and your background a little bit, and then you can talk about your projects if you want to. I don't know if it's too early. I don't know if we're spoiling anything.
Can I tell you my identical twin brother's former job title? Because it's far more impressive than mine. He was called an information synthesis theorist.
Ooh.
Yes.
He does a lot of stuff with consciousness and stuff, right?
Yeah.
I gotta have him
he works
on.
At the,
and
yes, you should.
Especially now that I'm doing
should
video.
I phone him up right now?
It's going to really confuse people.
Yes. Arno Klein at the Child Mind Institute in Manhattan.
Ooh. I'm into it. Let's get him on.
But my title, not information synthesis theorist, is Associate Professor of Biology, University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, with a focus on animal behavior and entomology.
Ooh, I love it.
Although I like to pull scientific visualization into the scene.
Did you do that?
How to visualize science, how to create visuals that work well scientifically, to be consumed effectively, and how to critique or assess visuals, whether it be on a billboard, in a newspaper, or a peer-reviewed science journal.
So you see a picture of a bug and you're like,
Happens almost, well, I won't say daily, very frequently. Say, for example, you see an advertisement with a honeybee. Or is it? No, it ends up being a hoverfly, a syrphid hoverfly, and people don't know the difference. I have a book. I can show you it in a bit.
You need to train me on the difference of this so I can really give people a talking to.
So you don't look like a fool in front of entomologists. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So you're outside. You see some flowers. You see a fly, or say a flying insect.
Okay.
Coming toward a blooming flower. Take note of a couple of things. One, how many wings does it have? Does it have one pair of wings, or does it have two pair of wings? If it has two pairs of wings, then it's not a fly, because a true fly, diptera, two wings in Greek, belongs to the hugely diverse and amazing order of true flies that have one pair of wings, and then the hind wings have evolved to be these knobby gyroscopic balancing organs called halteres. So you can even see those, like on a crane fly. You have this crane fly, some people call them mosquito hawks, even though they have nothing to do with mosquitoes, and you can see with these little knobs on the ends. Those used to be evolutionarily hind wings. Flies have secondarily lost those hind wings. But on any member of the order Hymenoptera, which means married wings, you have a pair of front wings, a pair of hind wings, and they're married together by these little hooks called hamuli. And that's the synapomorphy, the shared derived character that defines the lineage of Hymenoptera, which include ants, bees, wasps, the subject of at least part of today, and sawflies.
First off, I feel like when something has so many wings, it's just like, I don't really need those
It's a blur
anymore.
of wings. Okay.
Like that's
then
kind
I'll
of
give you a few
showing
more.
off.
I'll give you a few more. Is it hairy? Bees, and there are over 20,000 described species of bees on the planet, have hairy bodies. And not only that, a lot of them have forked hairs. And that increases the likelihood of them picking up proteinous pollen from the anthers, the male reproductive parts of flowers. Because they're not predators, they're herbivores, they're vegetarians, and they get their protein source from pollen, which they pick up on their bodies.
Oh, so they get their protein source from the pollen. I thought it was just a byproduct of going in and getting... No.
So you can have, when it comes to bumblebees, honeybees, you can see on their hind legs these big sacs, these pollen sacs, these baskets carrying yellow, orange, a purplish, a red, a white, depends on what flowers they're collecting from. The pollen that they scrape off their bodies into these pollen baskets or sacs. And
this is like someone at a buffet that's stuffing things in their purse.
Yeah. Well, so picture, it's a pandemic.
Yeah.
We want to socially distance, right? We want to try to avoid going to a densely populated store, for example, a market.
Good idea.
So what do? Imagine if you could go to a flower and get everything you need. Meaning you could get your protein source and your carbohydrates. So pollen from the anthers, and then put your tongue-like mouth parts down the corolla, the tube of the flower, and suck up or lap up the nectar, the sugary, sweet, with some amino acids, nectar. Convert that, including at least 100 ingredients from your own body, to make honey.
Wow. It's tongue-like mouth parts is one of the most sensual descriptions I've ever. They must have great dirty talk.
Well, think about, so if we're a true bug, and I've told you in the past that all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs.
Yes.
Because one order of insects are the true bugs. And they're defined by, again, the synapomorphy, the shared derived character that evolutionarily defines this group, is a piercing, sucking mouth part called a proboscis. And that's all they have. Sticks out, pierces into you, or pierces into a flower. An assassin bug wants to suck your blood, or a cicada, or say an aphid wants to suck the phloem from a plant, right? But in the case of a honeybee, it's so much more. They've got transversely chomping mandibles, right? They've got a pair of maxillae with palps that have contact chemoreceptors for taste. And then they have labia with labial palps below. Now what they can do is they can chew their food, or chew wax, for example, that they produce from their own bodies, or they can stick out these tongue-like mouth parts to suck up the nectar.
Amazing.
I had a professor, George Eichort, who said that insects' mouth parts are like a full silverware set. Knife, fork, spoon, all in one. Depends who you are. Like, for example, if you're a dragonfly immature, which is aquatic, they'll have these retractable and extensible mouth parts called a labial mask. It's from that third set of mouth parts, the labium, right? And what they do is, lightning speed, they shoot out this labial mask. So here you are, audience, and right? They shoot it out, and it can be spoon-shaped. It can have the tines of a fork, and it can even have serrated edges. And they grab their food and bring it in very quickly.
Amazing. Whew. Evolution.
The one way you can really define lineages and distinguish insects as a total amateur in the field. You think, oh, there are over 1 million described species of insects in at least 25 orders, right? And so many families. It's overwhelming. But once you learn a few different key features, you can begin to confidently and competently distinguish and categorize. And the Hymenoptera versus flies, that's a big one. The mouth parts for the true bugs, that's a big one. So you can look at mouth parts alone. And that's pretty easy to do if you're comfortable with looking closely at an insect or picking it up and looking at it. And you can see lots of beautiful things that distinguish them.
Here's my level of confidence. I don't know the difference between a wasp and a hornet.
This comes to the all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs, because all hornets are wasps, but not all wasps are hornets. Hornets constitute only one genus, one evolutionary lineage called Vespa. That's the genus name. And it has about 22, the most recent understanding is 22 species the world over. All but one of those are east of Europe, in Asia, Russia, Southeast Asia. Only one species is in Europe, and now because of this introduction of Vespa mandarinia, this Asian giant hornet in the US, we have 2 species. So hornets, to define hornets, they are wasps, but they're special. I could talk about their morphology, but I'll focus on their behavior. They are wasps that are social, so they form colonies, and they're predatory. Now, beyond that, they have features that, they're especially large, most of them, that distinguish them from other groups of wasps. Like bald-faced hornets, different genus, Dolichovespula. Notice I called them bald-faced hornets. That's inappropriate. They're not really hornets. And others, like paper wasps, genus Polistes.
Don't make that mistake.
No. Well, actually, don't make that mistake, because there are some wasps that are really docile, really passive, and if you're a gardener or a farmer, you really want those wasps as predators of herbivorous, plant-eating caterpillars and other, you won't hear me say this often, pest insects.
So let's get into specifically what everyone. I'm trying to really trying to clickbait people. This is
with murder wasps.
Yeah. So I don't really follow the news that much. Murder wasps happen, and I can't tell. So people can call them murder hornets as well, if they want to.
Yeah, people are calling them murder wasps or murder hornets.
It doesn't matter.
Neither name is the official common name. It's the Asian giant hornet, and neither name is appropriate. Why? Because they're predators. Every predatory species is, by default and definition, a murderer. Right?
Yeah.
So if, for example, you are not a vegan, you're a murderer. Now, you might be, say, a carnivore, specifically, exclusively. You might be an herbivore. You might be a fungivore, a nectivore. You might focus on blood exclusively, right? Like a vampire bat and some ectoparasites like lice and others. Or you could be an omnivore, eating anything in your path that's palatable. And it just so happens that bees, of the 20,000 plus described species of bees, they're almost all herbivores. The very few exceptions don't kill. They're saprophagous. They feed on decaying dead material. They're called vulture bees. As you can guess, their nests don't have the sweetest aroma. Unless you're really drawn toward putrescence. Now, wasps, on the other hand, they're predators. Now, I should say wasps, there are well over 100,000 species of wasps. Many of them are parasites and parasitoids, parasites that kill their hosts. And then there are predators. And all of the 22 species of hornets in the genus Vespa are predators.
So let's just, what exactly happened in your life when all of the sudden, all of the because I remember emailing you back in May, and I think you got slammed with some media requests and stuff at the time, or was it more than usual? What happened in our culture, because you also study the cultural impact of insects? What exactly happened where all of the sudden this was people cared about this subject? Was there something? Was there like some newspaper article that people got wind of? Was there an actual issue that happened like that week? Was it just that everyone was looking for signs of the apocalypse? Was it a combination of all those things?
It's a great question, because yes, something happened that week, but it wasn't something entirely new. It wasn't unprecedented, and I'll explain that in a moment. Now, why it struck the world such, and why people wanted me to talk about these Asian giant hornets, is it because they needed diversion from politics, economics, racial strife, and the pandemic? Hard to know.
Yeah.
But when you see something like murder wasps, that kind of pushes people's buttons, right?
Yeah.
The last thing we need, right, is a murder hornet. Well, what happened that week was the discovery of not just one, but a couple of specimens of a hornet species that doesn't belong to the Western Hemisphere. Vespa mandarinia, one of the 22 species of hornets. Now, this is one that is found in Asia, Southeast Asia, easterly Russia, Japan. So they have grown somewhat accustomed to this wasp, which can be dangerous, and we can talk about that. But we're not, right? We have some wasp species, certainly. And we have one introduced, at least in the eastern United States, hornet species, Vespa crabro, which was invasive from Europe, but this is quite a docile hornet. So it hasn't made the news. People don't worry about it anymore. Now, because we can't get rid of it, and because it doesn't make front page news for killing people, people have somewhat ignored it. Okay, so that's one introduction of a true hornet.
Quick break, just as a reminder to all the fans out there watching from your computer. When's the last time you cleaned up your computer? When's the last time? Oh, look at this. First off, my new audio listeners really need to start checking out the YouTube channel, because Barrett Klein right now has turned into an actual bug. Did you make that mask yourself?
I did.
Is that... You did? You made yourself a murder hornet wasp?
Actually, I should clarify. This is not Vespa mandarinia.
No.
It's not the...
What is it?
Asian giant hornet. It's actually Vespilla germanica, another invasive species, but it's a German wasp.
Ah.
A yellow jacket. And this could play a role in our discussion later.
Okay. Well, let's get back. Do you remember where we were when we cut off 5 minutes ago?
Yeah, definitely. And I bet you probably want me to wear my headphones and ditch the mask.
It doesn't matter too much. It's probably a good idea to wear your headphones.
We're talking about hornets, and we're talking about invasive species and how Vespa crabro from Europe had invaded decades ago. But why Vespa mandarinia is in the news right now is because it is invaded recently. And what does that mean? That means that last fall in British Columbia, Canada, there was a small, maybe a grapefruit-sized nest with a colony of these wasps, of these Asian giant hornets. Now, a little bit later, in December of 2019, 2 worker hornets were found in Washington state. The first time they had been found in the United States. But that's actually bogus, because back in 2016, and people all but ignored this, but in 2016, there was a full nest with live larvae and live pupae found in a package shipped from Japan at the border in the United States. And this was a lucky find, because picture yourself as one of these patrolling agents, say a federal agent looking through plants and packages and all kinds of things. How many packages are you going to check? With like 22,000 cargo ships coming through, you might check randomly 2% of the packages or so. So it was really fortunate when
does that person get like a gold star that day, or like a little smiley face on their review, or?
Wow! If I were that
that's
person,
a big that person stopped an invasive species. That's incredible.
You could look at it in a number of different ways. Maybe 2 ways to simplify. One is, I'm a hero, a bona fide hero. I stopped an invasive species from taking over, right?
If it was me, that'd be the story I'd tell everybody.
There you go. Alternatively, you could look at it and say, wow, how many other wasp nests are there in how many other packages I have not randomly selected to check, right? So the screening is really limited, and you stumbled upon one and you were lucky. Now, the key is, it's not all luck, because you have to identify and distinguish what is an invasive species, could this pose a threat, what is illegal, what is endangered, etc. And in this case, a person involved correctly identified it as an Asian giant hornet, and determined that it was possibly sent as a food item or a medicinal item. Because yes, in parts of Asia, this hornet and some other wasp species that have intense venoms are used in liquors as well as medicinals, and they're consumed in some forms.
This person, what kind of training does this person have where they can find a little nest in a box and be like, well, that's an Asian giant hornet if I've ever seen one, probably sent as a liquor. Like,
and they know exactly how to distill
together.
it. Now this is old news now, because you had the 2016
This is 2016.
discovery.
Okay.
And then you had this 2019 fall and winter discovery in British Columbia, Canada, and Washington State, United States. So people were on edge. If this is a new invasive species, it could cause problems. This is the time, because next spring, late spring or summer, it'll be too late. This is the time that we have to stop an invasion. So there's a bottleneck here. Will we capture the existing nests or queens? And so bait traps have been set out. People have been on the search for these hornets. And the key was they emerge from their hibernation as queens, as reproductive queens in April, mid to late April. So everybody was waiting, okay, we've got to be ready mid to late April to capture queens or to bait trap these wasps.
I see.
And guess what? Yes, a single Asian giant hornet was discovered in Canada. A woman saw it in her garden and she crushed it underfoot. It was sent off to be ID'd, and they're still trying to decide, I believe, if it's a worker or a queen. If it's a queen, okay. All right, you destroyed the possibility of this sole reproductive from producing a new colony. If it's a worker, that suggests that there might be an extant and presently existing nest somewhere. Now in Washington, additionally, a couple of workers have been found, or at least one individual wasp has been found. So they might be out there, and people continue to screen and search and bait trap.
Does everyone else just know more about insects than I? Just everyone in the world, just your average gardener steps on an insect and is like, you know what, that doesn't look right. I'm gonna mail this in to the people that I have their address here already ready to go and postmarked. So I send in any suspicious insects I find.
I think this is a good segue and a good way to address that question. Okay. So you might find something flying around your garden. Does it look like this?
Oh, well, that is... If I saw that, now it would stand out a little bit.
This is a pretty big wasp, right?
Yeah.
This is a Vespa, but it's a different species. Let's get bigger.
Okay.
This big. So if we're looking at
describe it in size to, it's like someone described it as about the size of a lighter, almost a Bic lighter. I wouldn't say it's quite that big, but it's pretty large.
No, definitely not. Now this one is a worker, and workers are smaller than the giants or the queens. And let me show you a queen. Let me make it easier to see.
That already looks enormous. Yeah, so that's... I mean, that's like almost... in your garden, you'd know something was up. Yeah, that's...
Okay, so this is...
That's like, what, the size of like a golf ball? Not quite. Close.
No. So the worker is about maybe 1.5 to 1 3/4 inches. The queen is 2 inches long with a 3-inch wingspan. So it's quite large.
Yeah.
It's not the largest wasp species in the world. There's a Pepsis tarantula hawk wasp, which is the largest species. It is the largest hornet species in the world, but it's not the largest wasp. And we have that largest species of wasp right in Arizona. So she probably saw something quite large with distinct orange coloring on the head and banded on the third major body segment. And so to get back to your question of, well, I mean, is it that I know less than others about insects? No way, because you've had me on your show a couple times now, right? So I've learned
so much.
In Wisconsin, if we're hearing about murder wasps, think how much Washington state residents are hearing about murder wasps. So they're looking out for them.
So these things, I guess the real danger, is there any danger to actually humans just getting stung? Is that any, like, are there people that are allergic to giant Asian hornets?
Definitely. So I'll start with extreme
Asian giant hornets.
That's right. I'll start with the extreme. So if I get stung by a honeybee, I'll have a quick feeling of pain, and then it'll swell up a teeny bit, and then it'll be itchy. And then it'll go away, right? Some people respond much more extremely to honeybee stings. And in the most extreme case, you can have anaphylaxis or anaphylactic shock, and it can be life-threatening. Now that's rare, but it's not so rare that more people die of bee and wasp stings than die of shark attacks in the world, for example, right? So it happens. And most of the deaths that occur from something like this Asian giant hornet, which strikes people, say, in Japan, in 2017, 2018, I think there was an average of about 13 people who died, right, each year. So people die. Maybe 55 people have died in recent years from this species in Japan. Most of them probably experience anaphylaxis with a particular cocktail, the venom cocktail, administered by this species of wasp. Now, in the grand scheme of things, if one of these wasps stung you, so Shane, first of all, are you highly allergic to bee or wasp stings? Okay.
No, love a good sting. Invigorating.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
In fact, in a moment, I'm going to describe stings to you
Terrific.
through an expert. But for the moment, I want to just compare venoms of this wasp versus another wasp and say a bee. If we take a honeybee sting and we look at the famous Justin Schmidt Hymenopteran Pain Index scale.
Very famous. I was just posting about it the other day.
Yeah?
He's been a guest on the show.
Justin Schmidt has.
Yeah.
What a great guest.
I went all the way to I intentionally
Tucson?
Went way out of my way to book a gig in Tucson that I would have never normally put that much effort into trying to get to Tucson just to get him on the show. Yeah.
Yes.
So
excellent. Worth it.
That makes me a little bit of an insect person.
Yes, it does. So Justin Schmidt recently published his magnum opus called Sting, which goes into the details of venoms. And he ranked in a scale of 1 to 4 the pain that he felt given stings from different Hymenoptera, that order of insects that includes bees, wasps, ants, and sawflies. And honeybees were right there at 2. He decided to give it a 2. And then he could look at 1s, 3s, and 4s. In the most extreme situation, 4 plus, by far and away more painful than other Hymenopteran stings, he determined
I was at his house,
to...
and I tried to get stung by a 4 at his house. It wouldn't sting me.
What was it? Pepsis, or was it Paraponera clavata, the bullet ant?
Nope, it was
probably a wasp.
Huge wasp. What was it? The street
Black
name.
and orange wings.
I think so. What's the name of it?
Tarantula hawk wasp.
Yes. Yeah, I tried to get that one.
She'll try to sting, and I say she because the workers and the queens are always female in this order. And what she does is she'll sting a tarantula, for example, and drag the paralyzed body into what becomes a brood chamber for her developing offspring. So she's a parasitoid. Yeah. Now, yes, that's a 4 all the way. Paraponera clavata, the bullet ant from, say, I've seen it in Costa Rica and Panama, that's a 4 plus. Now, let's go back to the honeybee as reference point. 2. Yep. Justin Schmidt. I've got to read these. Love them. Which of your sting descriptions are you most proud of? And Justin Schmidt might have said the same thing on the show to you in person. One of my favorites is the Florida harvester ant, which, though it's not aggressive and almost has to be forced to sting someone, still achieves a 3 on the index. I describe the pain as bold and unrelenting. Somebody is using a power drill to excavate your ingrown toenail. The club-horned wasp, on the other hand, which doesn't even merit a 1, is disappointing. A paper clip falls on your bare foot. Now, in the case of this Vespa Asian giant hornet, the description I've read is stabbed by a red-hot needle. Okay. Now,
so what's that, a 2 or a 3? That's like a 2 then.
Justin Schmidt has never ranked it, so unknown. Honeybee sting here, this Asian giant hornet sting here. Guess which one will hurt more?
I would say the Asian giant hornet. No?
Only because it administers more venom, say 10 times as much venom. But if you do, as Justin Schmidt et al. Did decades ago when this was okay, looked at how many mice die, say the ranking 50% of the mice die at this amount, this concentration of venom, honeybees well above that of these hornets. So honeybees are actually sting per sting more dangerous and more painful than a wasp, but because that wasp has a large stinger injecting 10 times as much venom, it's going to be far more painful. Now, it takes maybe 1,000 honeybees to actually kill a human that doesn't suffer from anaphylaxis, but it only takes, well, there's a range. One study looked at those cases known in Japan, but maybe 55 stings, but less than 30 you can survive. Justin Schmidt claims it's a couple of hundred stings that would kill you. So if you've got a colony of hundreds of these wasps, and they're not aggressive away from their colony, but if they're defending their nest, their subterranean, their underground nest, or they're defending a honeybee colony that they've taken over, then they can be aggressive.
Wow. What a way to go. Yeah. That would be, that's one of the worst,
Is it?
Well,
maybe it's euphoric and glorious. So you've got all this adrenaline pumping through your body, this amazing interaction with nature at its extreme. Or you could have a heart attack.
Plus shock.
Yeah.
So the real issue with these things, though, is that because they're an invasive species, they're able to. Our regular old honeybees never saw them coming. They don't have the defenses that other honeybees in their native environment might have.
Yeah, that's the understanding. And we're ignorant of this by and large, but the claim is that Apis mellifera, the western honeybee, hasn't evolved a defense, as Apis cerana japonica, a species of honeybee in Japan, has. So you've got this Asian giant hornet that has co-evolved with or evolved in symmetry in the same area as Apis cerana japonica, this Asian honeybee in Japan. And here's how it goes. You've got this giant Asian giant hornet, and it's off hunting. Maybe it hunts a praying mantis or a large moth or some other insect. Or, especially in times of desperation, it might attack en masse, and it's the only hornet species known to do this, a honeybee colony, which is far more numerous. Now, what do? First step is you detect, you identify, you locate a honeybee colony. Now, honeybee colonies can number in the tens of thousands, maybe 30 to 60,000 in the wild, in a hollow of a tree. Or you might have 10 to 60,000 or so bees in a single hive by a beekeeper, maintained by a beekeeper. Either way, Hornet has to detect, locate the colony, and she has a gland on her abdomen, and she can lay a little bit of pheromone there. This is a chemical tracer that communicates within her own species. If she is successful in laying a droplet of that pheromone and flying back to gather her sisters, her colony mates, to join her to mass attack this nest, then the honeybee colony is doomed. According to Ono, who's a lead researcher of these wasps, these hornets in Japan, it only takes about 20 to 30 of these hornets to wipe out a colony of 30,000 honeybees. So orders of magnitude more. They're impervious to the stings of the honeybees, so they just go and decapitate, kill off the honeybees, so then they have the honey stores and the pupae and larvae that they can feed on.
I saw the video that you sent me with the dramatic music, but it was incredible of just having 20 or 30 of these things just killing off thousands.
And it happens very quickly in the matter of hours. If you're a beekeeper who doesn't happen to be out during that particular afternoon, zap, you can be left with a pile of corpses, of bee corpses. So again, if she successfully lays that pheromone and flies off and gathers her sisters, they have a really great fighting chance of wiping out a whole colony and then having this massive food store. Mm-hmm. I said if, because in the case of Apis cerana japonica, they've evolved a defense in Japan to mass attack very quickly one of these hornets. So if they detect that hornet laying the pheromone, one will attack, alarm pheromone, which is isoamyl acetate, smells like banana, fills the area. Other honeybees detect, that's another within species means of communicating by chemicals. They fly over and mob that hornet. And what does that mean? If they can't sting it, so what? What do? They've evolved a defense where they contract their wing muscles without flapping their wings. They disengage them and generate intense levels of heat in the midsection of their body. They bake the invader alive. Not only that, they create an envelope of high concentration CO2. So they suffocate it and bake it alive before it's ever able to leave to gather up nestmates or sisters.
I've heard of honeybees doing this with other things as well. This is not an unheard of defense response to...
Apparently outside of our Western honeybee. But science happens by serendipity sometimes. And when I was in Würzburg, Germany, some years ago, I was using a thermal camera. But I was doing a totally different study. I was looking at sleep behavior in these bees. And I happened to have my thermal camera on an observation hive, which is basically plates of glass with bees that you can see on the comb so you can watch their behavior. And at night, for whatever reason, a katydid, which is a grasshopper, a cricket relative, came in the entrance of the observation hive. I saw it on the thermal camera because all these bees heated up and started taking out this katydid. And later, a mosquito flew and they went crazy and it heated up. And what happened? I decided to switch gears, at least for part of my time in Würzburg, and look at this invasion and defense, thermal defense potentially by Apis mellifera, the Western honeybee, like Apis cerana. So I thought, wow, do they have it? So I ran a study, which I haven't published yet, but one that I'm working on, in which, yes, they are able to take out at least Vespula germanica, right? Dun, dun, dun. So they can wipe out these girls. But a colleague of mine said, hey, let's see if that happens in the US. And he tried to do the same, and it didn't work. He had the same species of honeybee, same species of wasp, Vespula germanica, although it invaded from Europe in the 1970s, maybe not enough time has elapsed for evolution to select for this defensive trait. So it's something that would be fascinating to explore, and I hope to.
So I wanted to answer just a couple of questions. I emailed you some of the questions from people on social media and Patreon and stuff. I don't know if you got a chance to see them. But
I didn't. Sorry.
It doesn't matter. But there's some people, we've already answered some of them.
Okay.
But I think we had like a beekeeper. Is there any defenses that a beekeeper can do to prepare for this?
Two things come to mind. One is bait trap. So if you place a bait trap near your nest and wasps are led to that sugary secretion, they enter and they cannot exit. So you can trap those wasps, right?
Why don't the bees go for that?
That's a good question. I don't know if this exists in Japan. I haven't seen one myself. I wonder if it's large enough to allow the bees back out. I don't know the answer to that question, but a great question. The other that's standard practice in Japan, and this is something that I would do were they ever to inhabit Wisconsin, the driftless zone, would be to place a screen over the entrance of the bee nest, the hive. And the idea is that screen would have a large enough gauge to allow the honeybees in and out, but not the larger hornet inside and out. So that's one thing you can do.
All right. Sorry, guys. Another interruption. As I explained to you a couple episodes ago, I've been going way out of my way to improve the video and audio quality of the show. I found out this episode that one of the things that comes along with that is improving your hard drive space on your computer. Whoops. What a fun learning process. Barrett.
Great serendipity, because it allowed me an opportunity to check on what is now an erratum. I gave a statistic that was incorrect. There are, according to one source, 19,000 cargo containers per day entering U.S. ports. And so if you're checking pseudo-randomly 2% of those cargo containers, what are your chances of stumbling upon Vespa mandarinia or some other invasive species?
We avoided some very angry emails.
That's right.
I have a lot of
right on.
Fact checkers out there. That would have been like, that cargo container number is just not adding up to me.
Way
I imagine if you work on a cargo container, I bet you listen to a lot of podcasts. I would think. And so what if they're listening and then they're like, oh, come on.
Hey, when entomology is misrepresented and animal behavior is misrepresented, my hackles go up. I have to admit. To others, it's minutiae. To me, no, these are major facts.
You have a keen eye for detail. So where do you want to go from here? Do you want to pick up where we left off? Do you want to answer some questions? You want to do a little bit of both? Want to wrap up soon? What are you thinking?
I don't want to wrap up soon, because now you have a number of gigabytes that we have to use up.
We do.
And although it would be fun to try to recollect where we were and continue on, would be also fun to go through some of the questions that
would
your
be really
fans
fun.
have addressed.
Yeah.
So let me quickly wrap up the limited knowledge we have about this invasive species.
Yeah.
And I believe, if I'm correct, you addressed a question of, are they really a threat? And you astutely looked not just from an anthropocentric or human perspective, you addressed the honeybee perspective. Like, what does this mean for the future of honeybees, which are already in trouble with varroa mites that were an introduced invasive species themselves, and colony collapse disorder, etc., that are knocking out honeybees? Now, if we look from a human perspective, if we look from a Barrett perspective, I say wasps. I love wasps. Wasps are marvelous, and a greater diversity of wasps. I'd love to see these Asian giant hornets. This would be wonderful to study, to admire, from a personal perspective. But from a broader, more thoughtful, ecologically thoughtful perspective, it's the untold consequences and ecological rippling effects that could result from a new species that fills a niche that is presently filled by other social predatory colonial wasps is problematic. So I fully support measures to prevent this invasion. Now, this invasive species, again, is probably limited to not extreme colds and warmth, so probably has very limited regional capacity to establish itself. Should humans worry for their own self and pain? Only in the smallest fraction of people will they be allergic, and of those will they face aggressive wasps, which are typically more docile than a lot of other wasps, except under conditions where they're protecting their nest, which makes sense, and a nest of a honeybee colony that they have just felled, which makes sense. Right? So the worry isn't so much on the human side, but environmental unknown rippling effects should concern people.
Right.
From the honeybee perspective, if you're interested in apiculture, if you're interested in this also introduced species, granted 500 years ago, but Western honeybees surviving and thriving because we depend largely on fruit nut crops and others, especially if they're monocultures, being pollinated by honeybees, then you should be concerned if in regions where this Vespa mandarinia could establish itself, cause harm to beekeeping operations. That said, Japanese deal with it and have been dealing with it in relatively simple ways, like the high gauge screening in front of hives and bait traps.
Isn't there all sorts of problems with bees in Japan? Am I right in thinking that it's Japan where people have taken to pollinating some of their own, like with brushes?
That's in a village in China, and that was yes, an extreme situation where they apparently lost their honeybees. The population plummeted, and so they took this odd recourse with human labor of brushing from the anthers, the male reproductive structures that bear pollen, so from one flower, to the reproductive structure, the female reproductive portion of other flowers.
I mean, It's an extreme example of just how much we should care about our ecosystems and bees and everything else.
And actually, that's really relevant to, I just very briefly skimmed a few of the questions that were sent to you, and that was relevant to
what do you think of my listeners? Are they good questions, bad questions?
Oh, these are really excellent questions, and I welcome all questions.
Yeah.
And obviously, we won't have time to address. You got a lot of questions, which is fabulous. I wish these people were in my classes. Then I'd have really active classes.
I say it because I brag about how amazing my listener. Well, you've done stand-up science, so you've gotten to see kind of the crowds live that come out. But it's nice being a comedian from doing comedy clubs to a bunch of drunken bachelor and bachelorette parties, that over the last half of my career I've been able to curate an audience of curious folks.
This is obviously a sharp, curious crowd, and any instructor would revel in that. So here's one from Bethany Bailey's. She asks, how are wasps and bees and hornets and stingy things different? I heard the bees that are traditionally murder wasp food from a ball around the wasp beat their wings to raise the temperature and cook the wasp. So we addressed that earlier, and I alluded to the fact that bees almost exclusively are vegetarians, depending on pollen for protein and nectar for carbohydrates. While wasps are either parasitoids, parasites that kill their hosts ultimately, parasites, or straight-on predators, and all the hornets are predators. Here's one. If we just let all the honeybees get murdered, would native bee numbers rise due to the lack of competition? Does honeybees' cultural hegemony over all other bee species have noticeable ecological effects? It's a fascinating question because it learnedly, astutely addresses that bees aren't just one species. Whenever someone says bees, people typically think of one species, Western honeybees, when there are 7 families of bees. And only one of these families, Apidae, then one genus, Apis, and one species of Apis we're most familiar with producing the honey and pollinating the crops in the United States and beyond. So this species, Apis mellifera, was brought over to the Western Hemisphere, and it spread, right? Now, if honeybees were removed, just bloop, vanished from the Western Hemisphere, we won't go world over, just from where they were first introduced 500 years ago, we'd have problems. We'd have agricultural issues. Certain crops would collapse. Costs of food, it would affect economically, it would affect the dinner table, it would affect the supermarket, it would affect nutrition in certain ways because we'd have to change our diets pretty radically. Now, that's a short-term and potentially long-term effect, but if you think in terms of the wealth of non-apis native bees we have throughout the United States and beyond.
I just had an episode released. It was actually recorded before the pandemic, but I was at the Arizona Research Conservation
Great.
with a woman, Kim Franklin, and we talked all about bees
Good.
and the native
Good.
bees and stuff, and it was,
Then
very
listeners, refer to that previous episode.
Yeah.
Because a lot needs to be said and acknowledged and celebrated about the native bee species that we have, which do a tremendous amount in terms of pollination. Now, they may not produce the honey, but they do their weight in pollination.
Yeah.
Now, in my lab, the pupating lab, a couple of my students are working on pollination behavior by a family of bees that possibly few to none of your listeners have heard of. Caletidae. These are plasterer bees or yellow-faced bees that produce this slick, cellophane-like, clear, transparent casing inside tunnels that they dig. They're solitary, and they feed their brood pollen and nectar that they collect. And so my student is trying to figure out what kind of pollen do they collect? Is there a great diversity? Are they important pollinators? To what extent do they pollinate? So these are, to some extent, well-known questions in some groups and totally open questions in other groups. All right, next question.
Yeah, we just had an episode about bats very recently, and it's a similar thing. The similar question is, what happens when a species goes near extinct? That's because of like the white nose fungus or whatever it's called that I'm forgetting.
That's right.
And 99% of the population collapses all of a sudden. There's major implications. Sometimes just another species of bat then takes over. Sometimes that takes a really long time. Usually it's something that like you wouldn't wish for to happen, even if it might not be as bad as you fear or whatever, and it might be much worse than you could ever predict.
And there's a genetically problematic situation that occurs under those conditions too, called a bottleneck effect, where say you have a bottle and you've got a great diversity, let's say colorful jelly bellies or marbles, and you pour out of the reds, greens, yellows, and blues, maybe only yellows and greens fall out, right, in your first pour. That doesn't reflect, proportionally, doesn't reflect the source population diversity. So if those represent, say, the genes involved, or let's say the alleles, the forms of genes that were available in the source population, what are you left with? Maybe that bottleneck caused an effect where those individuals will have less genetic heterogeneity. They will be more homogeneous. And there are so many studies with honeybees and beyond to show that genetic diversity helps with survival and fitness or reproduction.
Yeah, no one wants to eat the same jelly bellies all of the time. That's for sure.
I know.
I think I know where you're going with that. We need to.
That's exactly where I was. You read me so well. Here's another question. So Africanized bees are dangerous, but they make honey too, if I'm correct. That is correct. In fact, the main reason Dr. Warwick Kerr initially in 1956 brought over colonies of African honeybees was that they seemed to be so active they would produce more honey. But there were problems that came with that. They were made by human interference, right? Well, not really, because when those colonies escaped, when swarms erupted from their Brazilian hives, they then mated with native bees. Well, let's say Apis mellifera that came from Europe. Interestingly, the hybridization, depending on who the mother is and who the father is, affects the level of aggression of those now Africanized bees, so-called killer bees. So depending on who the mother or father is, you may be even more aggressive. So this person asks, can we do that with other species of bees again and make a new bee species that is not only docile but resistant to the diseases, bacteria, environmental changes that affect the bees we have now for commercial uses? Astute question. While we've never influenced a speciation event in bees, apparently in London Underground there's a new species of mosquito. So anthropogenic effects, human effects, can cause speciation events in insects. But we can cause varieties to change in bees.
Wait, are you saying the London, like the subway system?
That's right.
Has a new species of mosquito?
Yeah, apparently as a result of that, a new species has, it's really remarkable.
Because at first I forgot that that's what it was called, and at first I'm like, wait, is there an underground organization?
Right. Among the mole people. And the last part of this person's question is really important, because we can do some measures where breeding bees can help with, say, their microbiome to deal with pathogens, etc. And that leads me to a point that a lot of agriculturists, beekeepers ignore or deny, and that is what some people call Darwinian thinking, and that is, let them go. Do something that appears more natural, and let those that have traits that can be selected for survive and thrive. So I have beside me Tom
Just let
Seeley's
nature take its
book,
course.
and it's The Lives of Bees, exactly. And what Tom talks about in portions of that book, and in a new book he's working on, is the idea that if you don't cram a lot of beehives together, as we typically do in the US, and we have maybe hundreds or thousands of hives together, talk about disease spread, think about COVID-19. Where is the spread most rampant? It's not among the hermits in the mountains, right? So in the case of our apiculture, how about we learn from some apiculture that exists in Asia, where there are fewer numbers, farther apart, spread farther apart. And also, if bees are struggling, don't maintain that lineage. Look for those that are surviving despite the onslaught of varroa mites and others. So we can think about your fan's question in a lot of different ways. Okay. Next question. Are the murder hornets the same as the wasps affecting France and other countries? And that's no. And that's the wasp I mentioned before. That's also a hornet, Vespa crabro. Okay. Is anything feeding on the murder hornets? You bet. They're going to have loads of predators, and they will, just as everything does, have their share of parasites. In fact, there's one well-known twisted winged parasite. A strepsipteran. Yeah. They're beautiful, marvelous, bizarre, little-known order of insect. And you wouldn't spot them in nature for two reasons. And they fall under the female and the male category. Females. How do you find female strepsipterans, these twisted winged parasites? Look for a wasp or a bee or maybe a cricket, and you have to look at the abdomen of that insect. And if one of the armored plates is lifted up slightly and there's a little brownish blob sticking out from underneath it, that's the female. No legs, no wings, no head, no... It's just a thing, right? So you might not notice a female. The male, this is where the twisted wings come from. And they have these weird, like raspberry-like eyes that operate differently than any other insect. They're not true compound eyes in the conventional sense. They eclose, they emerge as adults, and some of them have, get a load of this, guess how much time they have as adults to do everything that a male would do?
3 days.
4 to 6 hours?
Ooh.
To locate a female, which will be on the body of another insect. before you die.
Wow. That's a real frantic life.
Yeah. And apparently, some of them will go, at least one species has been documented to go for Vespa mandarinia, the giant Asian hornet. Or the Asian giant hornet.
What about, are there birds that are going to eat any of these things?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a good question. I mean, if they happen to fly in a spider web, right? Or if a lizard goes for them, there's going to be probably a degree of learning associated with avoiding this hornet. They might not sound exactly like or look exactly like wasps that are native to the United States, for example. But if we go to Japan, if we go to their native areas, I'm sure we'll find a number of predators and parasites and parasitoids that at least opportunistically go for them. May not be specialists on these hornets, but may opportunistically go for them. Shall I pick another question?
Sure, if you want. Yeah. Let's do one or two more.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, this is a good one too.
I'm gonna start doing this regularly. Before I've gotten questions and then I've just tried to read them ahead of time and try to remember enough of the gist of them to ask. But this is a fun approach.
How about I end with this one?
Okay.
Because a number of them I've addressed in different ways. But this one, what is the literal point to hornets? Would the Earth be affected without them? And I had a colleague who would probably look at you if you asked him that question and say, what is the point of you? What is the point of humans, right?
Yeah.
We can think of, I mean, Shane, you and I could come up with a long list, as your listeners could, with ways to address that question.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say one is a better way than another, or there's one correct way, but we can think about it a few different ways. Let's tackle just one or two of those ways. For example, thinking, what good are humans? Well, if we were to take that bent, we could say, well, who's doing more damage ecologically to the planet, short-term and long-term, irreparable in some cases damage to the planet, irreversible biodiversity loss? Is it humans or is it the species of hornet? Right? We could think about
we're number one.
Oh yeah. If we think about what benefits or assets come with having this hornet present, we can look to other hornets and other wasp species of social predators. And they are predators, and what are they focusing on? Sometimes they're focusing on agricultural problematic species, like caterpillars again. So having these predators do a much more efficient job and a safer job than our spewing neonicotinoids and other chemicals over plants to remove those pest species, those crop-eating species, that's a benefit, right? Also, in every, now I'm going to go into the inherent value argument. In every species, there's a myriad plus intricacies that are unique to that species. What does that species have to offer in unknown and maybe unknowable ways, especially if we prevent them from surviving, if we deplete their population or eradicate them? From an anthropocentric, a human perspective, we could think in terms of what do we gain? Not just in terms of predators removing pest species, but are there potential medicinals or foods,
alcohol,
etc.? Or that's right, the liquor with that punch of the venom.
I think that's what the question was trying to get down to the bottom of.
That's right.
You might have overly complicated
how can it diversify?
I think he was asking, can I get high off of this bug? What
there are other insects to which you can turn. But in this case, yes, they've been consumed in different ways for various reasons. But so the known benefits and the unknown, and in some cases unknowable benefits might be great.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of reasons and now I'm going to go to what I feel is the strongest argument, and that is the unknowable effects removing any species from its environment in terms of others. Sure, you take away this, to some, scary, to me, gorgeous and intriguing insect species, but to some frightening species. What might come about? Something more frightening? I keep going back to COVID-19 because we're in the midst of a pandemic during the recording of this, without a vaccine in sight. COVID-19 is horrifying. It's horrible. And we're seeing the effects, some explicit, some implicit, some obvious, some hidden, some short-term, some long-term. We eradicate COVID-19 with a vaccine. No telling what comes next. Now, I'm not saying that removing this virus would have a causal association with what could follow, but it's sometimes pretty easy to see in a really obvious large insect what effects can happen when you remove that. So there can be dangers, and we could take this in another direction where, what does this hornet do? So it kills scores of people over years and years' time, right? A mosquito, biggest killer through malaria, with over 1 million people getting malaria every year, many dying. What is the value of a mosquito? We could extend it to that, or a flea, or a louse, and the list goes on. And the arguments are fascinating. And there's where we'll end with the Q&A.
That's and that's it. What about ticks? Are you going to defend ticks too, just to get more of the insect haters on your bad side?
No, let's keep in mind ticks are arachnids. They have 2 major body parts, not 3, and they have 8 locomotory appendages, not 6.
We do need to keep that in mind.
That's where we need to start. Okay. And now that we think about arachnids, and in this case ectoparasites that can, again, opportunistically, facultatively suck the blood of humans, there's some situations like Lyme disease, which are really problematic. And I'm not going to dismiss these problems, but we have to weigh the cost benefits of eliminating a species forever and what known and unknown factors could result. They play a role. Everything plays a role in the environment. Well,
I'm still not convinced you know your insects, but good try anyway. I love
Shane
of
all people.
Me of all people.
Of all people.
After you sitting through 45 minutes of technical difficulties, that's how I'm gonna end things with a real roast of Barrett Klein. I hope that we've really converted some Hornet haters today. I hope that instead of the angry cargo inspecting emails that we were going to get avoided because of the technical difficulties, we instead get. I'm hoping and expecting a lot of apologies on from the anti-Hornet people. A lot of people that came into this wanted to get worked up, wanted to get angry, wanted to figure out how to get rid of these darn things.
There would best be a lot of humility. and I'd love to have follow-up questions or interactions. They can contact me directly or through Shane. That'd be a lot
amazing.
of fun.
Reach out to just Google Barrett Klein UWL, and you can find him directly. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Well, thanks for inviting listeners for the opportunity to do that. And thank you for once again, third appearance. I think you're tied for the, I'm not sure that any guest has been on more than 3 times.
Oh my goodness. So I need to have a 3rd and a half appearance just to
maybe
that threshold.
Yeah, you might be second place, or you're at least tied for first with like only 2 other people.
Maybe at least a cameo in the future, just so I can edge out the Shane competition.
We'll talk about it. I'm into it.
So I want to leave your listeners with positive impressions of the grand diversity of wasps, because if you're fearing wasps because of one especially large species that's out there, right? Remember that there are over 100,000 species of wasps, all with amazing behaviors. If you want to read from the so-called poet of science, Jean-Henri Fabre, about insects and the fascination of their lives, their day-to-day lives, all the way to present-day books about insects. Here's a good one. So colleague and friend Brian Danforth and colleagues just published The Solitary Bees, Biology, Evolution, and Conservation. So again, if you only think about one species of bee, this could open your eyes to the behaviors, the value from a human perspective, an environmental perspective, ecological perspective, and just from behavioral fascination perspective. This is a great one to pick up. And a little bit of a tangent, this is a fun one too. This is called The Songs of Insects, and it comes with a CD. And basically, it's a beautiful, wondrous field guide.
It comes with a CD?
Yeah, a wondrous field guide of the katydids, grasshoppers, crickets, cicadas, and the other the songsters, the singers, not only at night, but during the day, that you might be deaf to. And I was, to some extent. I would hear this soundscape that was just kind of a blur before I took a little workshop course with the author, and now it opened my ears.
Now you're like one of the car guys that hears the thing going down the street, can identify the year. Sounds like it might need a new chain.
It's a handsome
thing.
trig. Dog Day Cicada. You got it. That's right.
Amazing. And Justin Schmidt's book, Sting of the Wild,
Sting,
by the way,
yes.
because I sometimes plug the audiobook company Libro.fm only because they split half of their proceeds with independent bookstores. You pick your own independent bookstore in your area, or maybe a list of Black-owned independent bookstores. You click on that. Every time you get an audiobook, half of the proceeds from that go to them. And I know Justin Schmidt's book is on there. Offer code Here We Are if you want to help out this guy. But get into reading. There's some book suggestions for you. Thank you so much, Barrett Klein, for being such a wonderful, incredible guest once again. We should go for a hike or something sometime, a socially distanced little get-together one of these days.
I'd love that. I've been discovering more and more local hikes in the driftless zone, in the La Crosse area. And
awesome.
The insects are so diverse and gorgeous right now. I'd love to do that.
Let's do it. I want a whole insect tour. Awesome.
Indeed.
All right. Take care, my friend. Thank you very much.
Entomophilia.
Thank you, listeners, for being such a wonderful, curious people. We'll see you next episode. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure and hit subscribe if you want to support the show in what I do, bringing great information, great scientists to you. Go to Patreon. Send me money on Venmo. Give me all your money in any way that you want. There's more info in the link. You can also subscribe to things like Libro.fm or great courses and support my partners while also supporting me and getting awesome products that I believe in and educating yourself more. See you next episode.